Fortune in the storm, why rich investors embrace panic. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something that sounds kind of crazy at first. We're looking at the incredibly counterintuitive psychology of financial markets, specifically why the wealthiest investors out there actually capitalize on economic downturns. It's this fascinating phenomenon where when everyone else is sprinting for the exits, the truly wealthy are casually walking right in. So let's break down exactly how they do it, and honestly, the psychological shift it takes to see massive opportunity right where everyone else sees a total disaster. I want you to mentally take a step back with me and picture the year 2008. The world felt like it was, literally, coming unglued. Banks that had been around for well over a century were just collapsing overnight. Millions of people were losing their jobs. Families were tragically losing their homes. Every single time you turned on the TV, the screens were just saturated with pure fear. The headlines were screaming, financial meltdown and global crisis. People were watching helplessly as their retirement accounts lost years of hard-earned savings in just a matter of months. And, naturally investors panicked. They sold the whole shebang. They ran as fast as they could for the perceived safety of stuffing cash under the mattress. And here is where the story gets really interesting. While the vast majority of the world was running away from the market, a very small, select group of people were running directly toward the fire. They were buying up stocks, acquiring whole companies, and snapping up real estate. They were literally buying the exact assets that everyone else was desperate to dump. And over the next decade, well, many of those individuals became wealthier than they ever imagined possible. Which brings us to a core mystery. Why do the rich seem to get richer during recessions? What exactly do they know that the rest of us don't?
Think about it like this. Imagine you walk into your absolute favorite clothing or electronics store, and you see your favorite product marked down by 50%. What do? You get excited, right? You call it a massive sale, and you probably buy it on the spot. Now, imagine the stock market falls by 50%. Suddenly, everyone calls it a total disaster. The wealthy understand a fundamental truth that most of us completely miss. The stock market is the only store in the entire world where people are absolutely terrified of a massive discount. When prices go up, people get stoked to buy. When prices fall, they get terrified.
And why is that? Well, it comes down to one simple truth. Fear spreads way faster than logic. Human psychology really hasn't evolved all that much over the millennia. We are hardwired for survival. So when we see the herd running away, our gut instinct is to just run right along with them. But in financial markets, fear actually creates the absolute perfect buying environment. When panic takes over, logic just gets thrown completely out the window. People start selling perfectly good assets simply because they're afraid, which pushes prices down to completely irrational levels.
And we've seen this play out historically, over and over again. Every recession creates what economists call a transfer of wealth. Take the Great Depression. In 1929, we had the crash. By 1930, a massive sell-off. 1931 brought total despair, and 1932 saw complete capitulation. But then look at 1933, the wealth transfer. In every crisis, assets predictably move from weak hands to strong hands. They move from emotional investors to patient ones, and from folks who need cash immediately to people who prepared for this years in advance. The people who were forced to sell lost their wealth, while the ones positioned to buy created it. Different crisis, same exact story.
Let's put this into perspective on a personal level. Imagine two different investors who both get hit by a severe 40% market crash. The first investor has virtually no savings. So when the market crashes and stocks suddenly get a lot cheaper, they can only sit there and watch the opportunity pass them by in fear and frustration. Now look at the second investor who intentionally built up cash reserves. When that exact same 40% drop hits, they don't panic. They start buying. It's the exact same market condition, but it results in a completely different financial outcome simply because of preparation. So the takeaway here is absolutely crucial. Cash creates options. There's this huge misconception out there that the wealthy just hold on to cash because cash itself magically makes you rich. It doesn't. Actually, thanks to inflation, holding cash usually means you're losing purchasing power over time. But the wealthy don't view cash as an investment. They view it as a dynamic weapon. It allows them to strike and seize opportunities when others simply can't. They keep cash handy during the good times, not because they're terrified of a recession, but because they mathematically expect one to happen eventually. Let's actually apply some logic to those scary moments. If you see a major blue-chip company stock, say Apple, suddenly tank by 40% during a recession, you gotta ask yourself, has Apple actually stopped selling iPhones? Has Microsoft just vanished from the earth? Has Amazon completely stopped delivering packages? Usually the answer is a resounding no. The underlying business is often still churning out billions in revenue. What has drastically changed isn't the business itself, it's just the emotion of the investors who hold the stock.
Which brings us to a fundamental rule that every successful investor internalizes. Price is what you pay, but value is what you get. During a recession, the actual intrinsic value of a solid company might take a small dip, sure, but the price of its stock often plummets way faster and way deeper than that underlying value. The wealthy are actively looking for that exact gap between price and value. When the price falls way below the actual value of the asset just because people are freaking out, well, that is where the extraordinary opportunity lies.
Which perfectly sets up probably the most famous piece of investment advice in modern history. Warren Buffett famously said, "Be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful." This single philosophy has generated billions upon billions of dollars. Why? Because doing it requires going completely against human nature. When everyone feels safe and the market is booming, average people buy in, but the wealthy, they get cautious. Conversely, when everyone is terrified, the wealthy step up to buy. Not because they don't feel fear, but because they use history and logic to override it. And history is precisely what gives them the guts to do that. Every major crash in modern history eventually recovered. Every single one. Every recession has eventually ended, and every market panic has eventually passed. Now, when you're actually living through an economic storm, the fear feels terrifyingly permanent. It literally feels like the world is going to end. But history tells us otherwise. The wealthy bet on the historical certainty of recovery, rather than the temporary illusion of permanent disaster. But hey, to take advantage of that recovery, you have to actually survive the storm first. Recessions act like a brutal stress test for your finances. They expose every single weakness. If you've got expensive car payments, high credit card balances, and a heavily leveraged luxury lifestyle, an economic downturn makes those choices incredibly dangerous. Debt severely limits your choices. It backs you into a corner where you might be forced to sell off assets at the worst possible time. The wealthy fiercely protect their cash flow and manage debt, because avoiding debt gives them the superpower of having choices when opportunities pop up. It all really boils down to a radical reframing of time. The average investor is totally obsessed with the short term. When markets fall, they stare at their portfolio and desperately ask, what happens tomorrow? All they see is immediate danger. Wealthy investors, on the other hand, operate on a completely different time horizon. They look at a beaten-down market and ask, where will this company or this piece of real estate be in 10 years? By simply zooming out, they transform a terrifying short-term danger into a magnificent long-term discount. So how do they actually pull this off? Well, it's not magic, and they definitely don't have a crystal ball. The real reason the wealthy win is through these 4 very unglamorous steps. Step 1, emergency funds. Step 2, diversification. Step 3, patience. And step 4, discipline. I know, they sound super boring, but the wealthy don't just sit around hoping for an opportunity to magically fall into their lap. They meticulously use these boring mechanics to prepare for economic shifts years in advance. They build the emergency fund so they don't have to sell stocks just to eat. They diversify to protect their downside, and they exercise immense discipline. Because let's be real, wealth is rarely built in days. It's built in decades. Extraordinary fortunes aren't the result of a lucky guess on a random Tuesday. They're the direct result of applying those unglamorous, boring strategies consistently over a really long period of time and having the cash ready to deploy when a recession eventually and inevitably hits. It is a long-term game of positioning. Ultimately, yes, recessions destroy businesses, they cause job losses, and they create real struggles for everyday families. Nobody wants them to happen. But the wealthy recognize that economic storms are temporary phenomena. Businesses adapt, markets rebuild, and the fear eventually evaporates. The big takeaway here is that recessions don't just test the underlying math of our economies, they test human behavior. They test our patience and our preparation. Those who stay calm and act logically almost always emerge in a vastly superior financial position than those who simply gave in to the panic. Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question. Will you be prepared for the next one? Generation after generation, history has shown us that the greatest fortunes are built exactly when everyone else is too afraid to act. We don't know exactly when the next recession is going to hit or what's going to cause it, but we do know with near absolute certainty that it will come. And when that fear returns to the markets, incredible opportunity is going to arrive right alongside it. The only question is, what will you do when it happens?